Cactus 1539 hit birds. We've lost thrust on both engines returning back towards LaGuardia.
Cactus 1529. If we can get it for you, do you want to try to land runway 13?
We're unable. We may end up in the Hudson.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
That was the audio recording from the pilot of Flight 1549 on that cold winter afternoon. His plane was unable to land on a runway, and the frigid Hudson River was his only option. Hello, I'm Dick Brennan. Today we're taking a look back at 15 years ago. It feels like a lifetime ago, but it also kind of feels like it was just yesterday that U.S. Airways Flight 1549 encountered a bird strike less than 4 minutes after takeoff from LaGuardia. At the controls, you know the man, Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger, with 150 passengers and 5 crew members on board. Sully notified Air Control that he was going to attempt a very risky and rare water landing in the Hudson River. He then announced over the intercom to brace for impact. As you can imagine, the passengers on board had to be terrified, not knowing their fate. Fortunately, Sully slowed the plane enough that it struck the Hudson River and stayed intact. The plane remained in the frigid water. You remember the pictures, and there they are, thanks in part to the fuel tanks, which were not full. The passengers, one by one, got off the plane and walked onto the wings. From there, they were taken to inflatable rafts. Emergency responders were on the scene within minutes and started rescues. Now let's take a look back at how CBS 2 covered the crash on that truly incredible day.
Christine Johnson right now, who's in the newsroom with some additional information. Let's go to Christine right now. Christine?
Chris, I've been following some information coming in to the newsroom that we're confirming here. Right now, we can tell you that the plane, the fuselage of this plane, is near 23rd Street. It does appear to be obviously floating south in the Hudson River. I can also tell you that the FBI is now confirming that this does not, or they at least have no indication that this is any act of terrorism. That may be obvious right now, since all indications show that this was a bird hit. But again, I just wanted to pass along that the FBI, a spokesperson from that agency, is saying as of right now there is no indication that this is an act of terrorism. That's about the latest from here. I'm going to continue to monitor the Associated Press wires, and also we're working the phones here in the newsroom to get you the very latest information.
All right, thank you. We have CBS 2's Lou Young is near the scene on the west side. There you are, Lou. What can you tell us?
We're at West 30th Street. We're at the West 30th Street heliport. We watched the wreckage and the flotilla of rescue boats float by southbound a short time ago. It's down that way, as Christine said, West 23rd Street, and you can see some of the rescue workers and firefighters who've been following this wreckage south along the West Side Highway, along West Street, as it drifts with the flow of the Hudson River. We got out, I got out of a cab at 51st Street to try and put an eyeball on this thing, and hoofed it all the way to this point, 21 blocks. We passed Marsha Kramer and her crew up at 54th Street or about 50th Street there, where they were getting people off at the ferry station. We heard people say that they heard the sound of an engine explosion and that this appeared to be a controlled landing by the pilot. The pilot apparently did a very good job. I heard one witness telling police officers that he saw the plane apparently slowing down and setting down under a controlled sort of crash on the water, settling into the water. If this had been a high-speed crash, there would have been a lot of loss of life, a lot of debris breakup. The plane was pretty much intact and it floated. This looked like a controlled emergency landing.
Marsha Kramer on the scene for us on the west side. And Marsha, we appreciate you've talked to some survivors. What else can you tell us about what they have said and what's happening there at the scene?
Well, Dana, right now I'm standing outside where they're triaging patients, and I'm going to ask the cameraman to pan so that you can see that now there's a huge line of ambulances that have arrived on the scene, and they're waiting here to accept patients. If the cameraman will pan a little bit over, you'll see that there's the triage center where they brought many of the survivors, and they've moved more ambulances into the triage center, more stretchers, and they're waiting lined up, a huge line of ambulances waiting to take people for treatment. They're not only fire department ambulances, but it seems that they've brought ambulances from all over the city.
Let's go right now to Cindy Hsu with the very latest information that she has. Cindy.
All right, well, Christine, we are at Roosevelt Hospital right now. We're in front of the emergency room. We've seen a lot of ambulances come in, but at this point, they only have 3 patients, and doctors tell us that they're being treated for exposure. At this point, they don't know how serious, but at this point, it's just exposure. We're trying to get one of the doctors over here, but he's tied up trying to get updates on the patient.
All right, right now we want to bring in Pablo Guzman. He's going to talk more about these bird strikes, and I think maybe for the common person, you think to yourself, this can't be all that normal. This can't happen very often, but apparently it does.
Yeah, so much so that Airbus, that U.S. Airways jet is an Airbus A320. Airbus actually puts out a series of flight operations briefing manuals, kind of like online references for pilots, and there's a whole separate subcategory called bird strikes. Now, among some of the main points are that pilots may expect to encounter from 2 to 5 bird strikes during their career. The FAA reported over 33,000 bird strikes to civil aircraft between 1990 and 2000.
So many notable moments from that day, including from our reporters. You saw the late, great Pablo Guzman providing his expertise, as he always did. And I want to bring in Marcia Kramer. Marcia, you did some incredible work that day. There were reports that you were the first reporter on the scene, but I was there. I didn't see you.
Yeah, but you weren't the first reporter there. Because the truth is, as you know,
I was at a different station, in case anybody knew. So Marcia and I were coming from the same place.
We were both coming from Mayor Bloomberg's State of the City speech, which was in Brooklyn.
Right.
Only you were coming down the east side.
Right, going to that other station. Right.
To that other station that remains nameless. And I was coming down the west side. And the thing was, as we were coming down, I saw the first emergency vehicles start to arrive there. And I said to my photographer, Dan Barlucci, pull over, something's going on, let's find out what it was. So while you were still on the east side, doing I don't know what, allegedly on the east side, I was actually there. It was freezing. I got there before the first rafts actually arrived. I know.
And you do look cold. I mean, it was freaking cold.
Freezing. But I got there as the first rafts were in the water and hadn't even landed at the triage site. When they brought them in, they were bringing in stretchers because I think somebody broke a leg or something. They were taking somebody to the hospital, and I was there interviewing people as they were getting off the rafts and getting into the location where they were triaging people. It was really quite a sight. And not only that, but you see, they didn't really want to have a reporter there. I was there with a cameraman. They were like, what are you doing here? And I just kept talking and interviewing people before they threw me out. So I got the first people who actually landed at the triage center. It was a center where they were bringing in people not only on rafts, but eventually they got some of the ferry boats that plied the area
New York waterways, which
to try to bring them in.
I will cede the point. Marcia was first on the scene. I was just teasing her, just doing a little reporter teases there. But obviously you were. And what's extraordinary is we cover such horrible things in our lives. We have, right? And on a day-to-day basis even. And this was different. You just kept waiting for the awful news. Oh, we lost someone, or there was terrible injuries. But no.
It was actually good news and good. But the thing is, you have to give credit to the captain who really thought, you know, remember, he tried to dump some of the fuel so there wouldn't be a lot of fuel there. He got the rubber rafts from the plane, but then what happened was that all these ferries, because he had put out an SOS, all these ferries in New York waterway brought their boats to the area as well, and they were helping take people, but some of the people were brought to New Jersey, some were brought to New York, and they were doing it to both sides.
It was, and I just had the opportunity a few years ago to interview some of those ferry captains, and they came right up to the plane. They even bumped into the plane, and I was interviewing some people today who were saying, hey, you couldn't believe it. One gentleman I talked to, he said he actually, they thought he was jumping into an inflatable life raft. He jumped into the Hudson unwittingly, but was able to come back around. And you're talking about, of course, the great Sully Sullenberger, which I have to think that he may be one of the great heroes in American history when you think about it. Do we know any commercial pilot who's ever done anything like this in the world?
Well, who would ever think to try to land in the Hudson? It's not exactly, you know, hospitable to any kind. I mean, you know, it's not a, you know, and it was a cold day. There were a lot of waves. There was a lot of current. In fact, if you saw when the boat landed, one of the things that I focused on was the fact that the boat, even though they were trying to offload people, was moving fast down the Hudson, and in the blink of an eye, it was already at Battery Park City.
Right. All of a sudden, everybody said, "Okay, could you get a?" I remember saying, "Get a shot of the plane." I'm like, "Wait, you missed it. The plane was gone."
It was at Battery Park City, which is like 5 miles away.
Right. And one of the passengers who I had spoken to had said that he was in the back of the plane, and then the water started to fill up, and he said, "Oh man, I survived a plane crash, but guess what? I could drown here." So there were so many heroes, in addition to Chesley, the co-pilot, and then imagine the coolness of all those flight attendants who were on board. They had to get.
They were the last people to get off the plane.
Right, and they had to get them off quickly because they didn't know that the plane wasn't going to sink. Right.
They also didn't know that it wasn't going to explode because they didn't know whether he was able to dump enough fuel.
Incredible. And then we just saw this incident last week of this Alaska Airlines jet. Another incredible incident when the door blows out, and you say to yourself, and we've spoken to some of these passengers on these planes. Most of them have gotten back on the plane. I don't know if I would do that. Most of them have, because at some point you got to go on and live your life.
Well, you know, another thing that you should talk about is the fact that it was so bitterly cold, and most of the people who were on the plane didn't have time to like grab their coats or anything. They'd taken their coats off.
Right.
So what happened was, as they were landing, and they were just in like sweaters or shirts and stuff like that, they were giving them blankets and things to try to keep them warm. And the next day, I actually had to go with some of them to stores to try to, buy. We went to Century 21 actually.
Well, right down there, right? Yeah.
Because they were down there to try to buy, warm jackets, warm clothes, because they had nothing. Everything was lost on the plane, and it was freezing. It was just amazing that they all survived, and they were in good spirits.
I remember when we were all gathered right by New York Waterway waiting for the press conference, and as you said, it was extremely cold, and one of the guys was saying, "Oh man, it's cold out here." We all look at him like, "Really, buddy? Were you just on the wing of a plane wearing a t-shirt?" Seriously? And it is funny because some of the passengers who I've interviewed, I said to them, we were out there and we had jackets on and we were waiting for you to come out and it was so cold. And they're like, I was just, the adrenaline, the rush of the adrenaline was so great that I didn't really feel it until later. They were so worried about surviving. And one of the passengers I spoke to said it took them 2 days to get off that adrenaline rush because just being out there was so terrifying. Because as we said, it's one thing to see yourself going into the water, but it's a second thing to say, oh, now I got to get off this plane.
Well, also, it was sort of interesting to see the fact that the way that the emergency response happened. I mean, first of all, there was just a single fire truck that arrived, and then a number of police cars, obviously with their lights going, and then all of a sudden a huge line of ambulances, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And we were actually lucky that we were able to park and get across the street before the ambulances came, because then they started, stopping traffic.
Right.
But it was really interesting because they were not happy that we had to like jump over the dividers.
Right, because you're at the West Side Highway there.
We had to cross the whole West Side Highway because remember we were on the other side of the highway, so we had to run off. I jumped over so many dividers to get there that the bottom of my pants were shredded. When it was like unbelievable because obviously I was wearing heels at the time. Always important to cover those kind of things.
In heels. In heels, a great idea.
So I'm jumping over these dividers in heels, trying to get to these things, and the cops were going nuts, like, "What are you doing here?" But it was actually very organized the way the emergency service people were able to get to the people, triage people who needed the most important medical service, and get them quickly to a hospital where they could be taken care of.
Absolutely. And
although hypothermia was a big concern.
Yes, because they were in that water, and that water is very cold, and here we are in the middle of January, and that water it was much colder then than it is now because we're in warmer temperatures.
And it's true, it was really cold that day. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting was the fact that the captain and the crew made sure that they were the last off the plane, and they were the last boat to be brought back to that area.
And one of the passengers I interviewed said today, and this is 15 years later, he said, Captain Sullenberger, he's still my hero because he took care of us then, but through the years he took care of them. That's what kind of a guy you have.
Do you think that you would ever, in a situation like that, would you ever get back on a plane?
I probably we would have to eventually for our job, but I could see why this could be life-altering, and one of the guys I interviewed said his mother said, "You have to get back on that horse again," as if it's that simple, just get back on the horse. But he did, and It really is, Marcia, as I said earlier, it's one of these rare cases where we can cover something and then go back 15 years later and have a smile on our faces.
And that is why it is called the miracle on the Hudson.
Perfectly said. And just a few days ago, we got a chance to meet up with some of the passengers on Flight 1549 who reunited here in New York.
We came down like right over there, and then you went over to Weehawken, right?
Barry Leonard and Ian Wells returned to the scene of the miracle.
Can you guys believe 15 years?
I'm just so blessed to be here, honestly.
Yeah, no, at 15 years, I was a college student. Now I've been able to build a life, build a business, and I'm so incredibly grateful.
They shared their incredible story of survival with 153 others on a cold day in January 2009. Flight 1549 out of LaGuardia struck birds shortly after takeoff.
Cactus 1539 hit birds. We lost thrust on both engines returning back towards LaGuardia.
What was your first indication of trouble?
Our first indication of trouble was the plane all of a sudden just started shaking. It was like a boom.
What was the scariest part? It was silence. The plane goes vroom, and it sounded like a clicking sound. It's a click, a click, a click, like you're turning over on a car. And I immediately look out and I say, the engines are off. The engines are off.
The captain took the plane and just started going down like a roller coaster. And so, I mean, at that point, I was like, yeah, I'm going to die.
And we make this hard left turn, and all I see is building, building, buildings. And so I see us going down, and I say, oh my God, we're going to go in the river.
Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger told controllers he wasn't making it back to the airport.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
There was one announcement, and that was, this is the captain, brace for impact.
Passengers in the middle seat, he grabs my hand, interlocks it with the woman in the window, and he starts praying.
The plane hit the water at some 160 miles an hour. Incredibly, everyone on board made it out. Barry Leonard wound up in the hospital with a cracked sternum, but told everyone back then how a crew member had given him the shirt off his back.
People were saying, great job landing the plane, and I was like, I didn't land the plane.
Ian Wells made his way out, one of the last few to escape the waterlogged fuselage.
I look out, everybody's standing on the wing. There's no room to get out there. I would have to essentially like push somebody out of the way. So I'm like, I can't go out that way. And the pilot comes and says, hey, there's room in the left life raft.
15 years later, Barry Leonard now says he literally became a new person that day.
It changes your DNA totally. I'm a different person now than I was back then, without a doubt.
Ian Wells eventually got on another plane to go back to school. The guy next to him wanted to know why he was so nervous.
I go, you know the plane that landed in the river a couple days ago? And he goes, of course. And he goes, I was like, I was on that. He goes, you know what? I am so happy I'm sitting next to you right now. I go, why is that? He goes, nobody gets in 2 plane crashes in 1 week. He goes, this plane's fine. I'll see you in Miami.
Now Barry Leonard has something to remind him of what everyone did that day, a drawing.
And it's a picture of the plane with the people in the wings and everything, in the hands of God underneath it. I mean, I believe that it was the crew, it was the first responders, it was the passengers working together, but I think it was fate too. I think God really helped us with that.
And thank you for taking a look back with us at the miracle on the Hudson. Marcia Kramer, we can confirm you were first on the scene. It wasn't...
Oh, no, you're going to continue to argue that you were.
Maybe off camera, maybe we will, because we always do. But the great Marcia Kramer. Marcia, thank you so much for your reporting then and now. And you want to watch more episodes on our YouTube channel or at cbsnewyork.com. I'm Dick Brennan with Marcia. We'll see you next time.
Isolated incident.